Hi, I am Tony Russo from On Deathcare, and this is The Rest, your weekly rundown of news from around the funeral industry. There's plenty of stuff to get to this week. It looks like there may be a leadership change at Foundation Partners again. And there was a miscremation that I want to talk about a little bit more in depth this week. And there's lots of other stories that we're going to just quick touch on or dive into depending upon their relevance, I guess. But before I get into all of that, I do want to take this opportunity to thank my paid subscribers for sponsoring this show and allowing me to do what I do. I appreciate all of my subscribers. And please, if you have not subscribed yet, consider subscribing so I can make sure that I get you all the news that I write every week. I usually do. I'm doing like now 5 or 6 stories a week. I'm not sending all of them in emails. I'm kind of batching them sometimes because I don't want to bombard anybody. But they are all there, and you can find them all if you go to ondeathcare.com. But if you become a paid subscriber, there are some benefits. At the regular level, you get at least in one extra column per week. And this week I debuted the new chat function where if something is breaking, I will just text it essentially to the paid subscribers. They get an email and they get a chat on the Substack platform. I don't literally text their telephones. But it's another benefit that I've decided to add because I could. Anyway, whether you subscribe for pay or subscribe to make sure you stay up to date, I appreciate everything you do. And again, as always, I'll say it again at the end. Thank you for your attention. I know that it is at a premium. All right, let's get into it. John Smith appears to have left or been asked to leave Foundation Partners. I got some emails this morning, June 8th, as I'm recording this, that said that they were parting ways. Most of the emails suggested that he was asked to leave. So I shot a note to Foundation Partners, and I'm waiting for a response. I don't think I'll get a response. Foundation Partners likes to send out what they like to send out and have that printed. So we'll see if and when they send out a press release on this. But more important, and I think critically, not even more important, I critically, this is the second banker in a row that has no funeral service experience and has led Foundation Partners and has been on a shortish tenure. So John Smith started about 18 months ago. Before him, there was, Robertson, excuse me. So there was Kent Robertson, and Kent Robertson came from outside of the industry and was chief operating officer for a little while, and then moving into the CEO role for just under 2 years or just about 2 years, and then moving on. And again, nobody knows whether they were asked to move on. Whether, everybody, again, that's Foundation Partners is a private company, so they get to say what they want about what happens there, and we get to take that at face value. What I want to, just bring to your attention, I guess, and this comes from my coverage of SCI, and it comes from my coverage of Carriage. I don't know how high up the chain it makes sense to have the bankers. I think that they are getting very, very impatient, and I think that as cheap as money is right now, I think everybody kind of smells the end of the haymaking days on the wind. And it is nerve-wracking and should be nerve-wracking. During John Smith's tenure, the thing that I recall the most was that Foundation Partners started these regional care centers. They were like doubling down and making all of these care centers to kind of cash in on both direct and arranged and prearranged cremation, in areas where it made the most sense. So expanding their hubs or finding places between their different hubs where they could put a care center and kind of cut the expenses of having to have lots of crematories running or lots of crematories or funeral homes without crematories, making them more attractive to purchase. So I guess we'll see, we'll see what Foundation Partners has to say about this departure. Most important, though, I would be really interested to see who steps up, not in the interim, who steps up permanently. The last time they had someone who had any real funeral service experience was back when Bob Bacala was the CEO, and he had worked his way. I mean, he didn't come from funeral service either, but he had worked his way up for a long time in the business, and he lasted about 4 years as CEO before handing over the reins to an interim while they went to look for the person who ended up being the next CEO. The other concern, and it's a real one, is that there just might not be enough left to cut. I mean, I don't know if you read, I'll put a link to the notes in my reporting on Park Lawn. And Park Lawn went private at just the right time because their revenues were just based on acquisition. This is acquisition-driven revenues. And we don't know how Foundation Partners, again, also now a private company, we don't know how they're generating their revenues, but when you're turning over as many bankers as you've been, it makes a person think that you may be relying more on new revenue from acquisitions than on the efficiencies that these bankers are supposed to bring to the table. So again, this is all speculation on my part based on the little bit of information that has been out there, and of course of my covering the industry for the last several years. So there is no link in the show notes. So this is the only existence of this until I get confirmation or more information from Foundation Partners, and at that point I will I'll send out a little something in case you missed it. Franklin County, Ohio family has filed a civil suit against Tidd Funeral Home, alleging the facility wrongly cremated their mother against her expressed, deeply held religious beliefs and a detailed prepaid contractual arrangement. I have a link to the story and to the court documents in the show notes. This happened in 2025 in May, and the family is suing for $25,000. That's not really what I wanted to talk about, though. One of the things that came out in my investigation is the person responsible for cremating the wrong body was brand new at the job. They'd been on it. They'd been certified in just before the end of 2024. They got their license in January and then committed this egregious error in May. Well, June, essentially, about a year ago. It was May 28th was when the Nancy Anders, the woman who made the arrangements, died. And she didn't just say, don't cremate me. She said, I want to pay to have my husband exhumed, and I want to be buried in my nightgown next to him. I don't want to be embalmed, and I want my head placed on his shoulder. And I will cover whatever those costs are. They were $9,500, which honestly seems incredibly inexpensive for having to for the exhumation and the care work that would have had to go on with this if it happened. What I mentioned in the podcast just last week, an interview I had with Faith Haug, is this disconnect between what is expected from people who have finished school and what ought to be practically expected of them. And for someone who's only been not out of school, this was not someone who was a funeral director, or this is someone who took just the course. And when we were talking to Faith, I think she mentioned it on the podcast, but I have another interview with her that I'm getting ready to put out. It's not about the courses. The courses are fine. There's only so much that can be taught about how to do cremation. And she said that the CANA, I don't know, but she told me that the CANA and the NFDA certification courses were perfectly acceptable. And they just weren't they weren't a replacement for learning how to do it. And she said that really like 2 weeks before this happened, because in Colorado, as you know, they've made a bunch of changes, and one of her concerns is that they have a standalone crematory operator certification and licensure procedure, which lots of states have. Many, if not most, states have this. And her concern was, do you really want someone who's gone to just the crematory operators course running your crematory? I hope that the answer is no, and I hope that, you know, this is not a name and shame kind of thing. This is if you're at home now and listening to this and you just left someone who's only had a few months of experience in your crematory and before that had not been in death care at all, if you have a non-funeral director, brand new employee, and they're the only ones at your crematory, turn this off, go in and relieve them. You know, this is something that, you know, I'm sure that the TIDs had wished they had done. You know, there has to be an intensive training process if you're going to just accept the certification. The certification isn't meant for leaving people alone. Certification is meant for you to be able to talk to them and say, okay, you do this, that, and the other thing. These are our processes here. This is our attitude here. This is our cultural attitude here. Because, I mean, they had to make a special thing about where they put this body. They didn't. I can't imagine how this happens. I can't imagine how something like this happens. I feel very bad for, I feel awful for the family. But, you know, the TID funeral home, you know, and to their credit, you know, the owner, not even the funeral arranger, the owner called and said, you got to come in. We have a problem. And, you know, and he addressed it head on, which is the best way to do these things. Miscremations, unfortunately, are probably going to happen, especially at funeral homes, only because funeral homes are one of the few places where you have people who are being cremated and also people who are not being cremated. And that just makes it all the more important to take this very, very, very seriously. And, you know, I don't think anyone would deny that cremation specialist is a job that has to be cultivated. You know, knowing where the buttons aren't sufficient. If you've taken a course just online, it can only help you understand how to do the job. I don't think anyone pretends that you can take this course and then just walk into a crematorium and be in charge. I would love to hear some feedback. I'd love to hear how you guys handle your crematory operators and your crematory operator training program, in as much as maybe you have one. I love this story. There is a funeral home in the Frank Duca Funeral Home in Westmont Borough, Pennsylvania. Wanted to add a storage facility. Let's just start with that. So they added this storage facility, and I guess during construction they said, you know what, we could probably put a crematory in here as well. And so they made arrangements to put a crematory in. That is, they cut a hole in the roof for the flue to go out. And then building inspectors noticed, and they're like, what's that for? And they're like, well, if we want to add a crematory later, we can. And everybody's like, hold the phone. And so they shut the construction down, and they're making them go for a permit for a crematory instead of for a storage facility. And given the way that things tend to go with crematories, I don't love their odds. Maybe, hopefully they will. I mean, you know, I'm an advocate for allowing people to do what's legal, because I don't know if they'll need rezoning to do it, but now that the public is aware that they're interested in putting out a crematory, I don't know what kind of place Westmont Borough is, but the pitchforks could very well come out and it could be dead on arrival. And what I got a kick out of was one of the funeral directors said, well, we'll just turn it into a Skylight if they deny the crematory. So I guess he's ambivalent about it, which is, I guess, just the way to be. So link to that in the show notes. Human composting failed in Illinois. I kind of expected that. We've reported on it a couple times over the last few weeks because they've been the proponents have been very excited about the possibility of this passing, and I was skeptical for what I think were very good reasons, and I was proven right. A couple years ago, there was a movement in Illinois to force people to bury the cremated remains like to establish like civil or maybe even criminal penalties for failing to have cremated remains put in a cemetery, not to make sure that they're properly disposed of, but literally in a cemetery. And I thought that was strange. And I reached out to Barbara Kemmis of the Cremation Association of North America, and she said this is essentially, she said, this is a guy who does it every now and again. And so I started poking into him, and it's just like this nutball that every now and again gets enervated and decides that he wants to try to force people to have all of their cremated remains buried in a cemetery. But in another note, and there's been some, there's a movie coming out called The Death Boom. The trailer is out, and I'll put a link to the trailer in the show notes. But that one of the themes of this movie is kind of the space that cemeteries take up, and for better or worse, that's not a conversation that I really want to have. But I do want to say that I wonder how much it will affect people's views of alternative non-burial. I don't think they're going to be very fair to the cemetery industry, to be honest. So we'll see when it comes out precisely what's involved. But that's what I was thinking about as well when I saw the notice about Chicago's failed attempt at human composting. Anyway, link to everything in the show notes. And actually, along those lines, this woman in British Columbia, Canada, has decided to start her own natural burial cemetery. Her name is Margaret Waterton. She's in her 70s and looking at what she wants to do with her property when it is not useful to her anymore. She abuts a big forest, but there's been a lot of interest in selling to developers. According to her, she could put 4 units on her 2.5 acre property. Each unit could have 11 living residences. So 44 new dwellings, I guess, would be on her 2.5 acre property. And she does not want that. And so she went around and she tried to find out ways that she could make it so that nobody could ever turn her former property into buildings. Because again, once you start building by the forest, maybe you keep building in the forest. Maybe that's not a big deal. I know that the developers aren't afraid to cut down a forest to build in it. So after all of the research, she found out that if she had a cemetery and she buried at least one person in that cemetery, then it would be protected from all sorts of development in a way that nothing else could touch. So she's going before the town to get her property rezoned so that it can be a cemetery. Now, the other thing I like about this story is that the anti-cemetery people and the anti-development people are going to be at loggerheads. I had a nice talk with Renee Negrete of Carriage Services, and who is on the educational board for the International Cemetery, Cremation, and Funeral Association, because they have a new program that they're calling their 240 workshops. There's a link to it in the show notes. But what I got a kick out of is that they're going to try to have these all over the place. And the hope is that they're cheap, and by cheap I mean inexpensive, and that they're short and that they're centrally located. So people who normally can't go to industry events and to get kind of continuing education opportunities, this starts to solve that problem. And I think it's an exciting project. And I think that if you are a line employee who can't fly to all the big NFDA events, this is a really excellent opportunity to start to make inroads into the larger industry, the industry at large. All right, anyway, link to that in the show notes. And that will do it for this time. The rest has been written, produced, videoed. If it was done by me, Tony Russo. Thank you again, as always, for staying with me, and I value and appreciate your attention. I know it is at a premium. Again, special thanks to my paid subscribers for funding this mad funeral service news project of mine. I'm flattered that you participate, and I hope you guys are feeling like you're getting your money's worth. And if you've not subscribed, please subscribe. Go to ondeathcare.com, where you can subscribe for free to get newsletters more than weekly, usually 2 a week, plus all the podcasts and everything delivered right to your inbox, so you don't have to go hunting for them, because somehow I feel like you're not getting up and Googling, well, what did Tony Russo say today? So I'll take that responsibility off your shoulders. We will be back next week with some more stories. Hopefully I'll get some more information on the on Foundation Partners in the next week. And I think I have something interesting coming out on education and also on the Colorado changes. They made another change just 2 days ago that I'm incorporating into that story, and hopefully I'll bring all of that to you next week. But until then, we'll check in with you next time.